I'm just gonna say it. January was not a great reading month. Hello, and welcome back to Overbooked. I'm Amanda, and today we're gonna be doing a January wrap-up. For January, I read a total of 8 books, and I read another chapter in Little Women. I don't think I will ever finish this book, but when I finally do, maybe we'll finally get that movie review / book review video. It's never gonna happen, I feel like. But regardless, I read 8 full books, and I just want to dive in and get into all my thoughts on this because that's kind of a lot of books, and I would like to say that it was probably very helpful that I hadn't started my class yet, and that for like the first 3 days of the year, I didn't have to work, so, which was really nice. Thanks, job, for giving me ample time to read. I really appreciate it. The first book that I read for 2020 was Conviction by Denise Mina. This was the Reese Witherspoon pick for whatever month. I think it was December because January was such a fun age. So this was her recent book pick, and I'm gonna say no go. When I picked this book up, I was like, okay, this could be fun. This could be a really great book, and it just really wasn't for me. So it centers around this woman, and she loves reading and she loves listening to podcasts, and she starts listening to a true crime podcast one morning, and she realizes that she knows one of the people involved. It's like an old friend of hers. And then she hears a knock on her door and her whole life changes. It ends up being like her best friend, and she's telling her that pretty much that she's like ruining her life. Like her husband is leaving her for her best friend. Her best friend is pregnant. Like they're gone. Like he's leaving her and taking the kids. They're going on this country trip. After her husband leaves with the kids and his new lady, she like dives into this podcast. Like she just like is gonna like, that's her life now, is this podcast. But then this guy shows up at her door who is her best friend's husband, and then she has like this neighbor who sees them, takes a picture, and then all of a sudden like they're running. Like she's running away from everything, which brings you to like find out that she's been running her entire life. Like she's not really who she says she is. She's made up this identity and she's been running her entire life, which is a cool plot point, right? But so anyways, this book, like after this, so now that she's on the run because this person took a picture of her, so she knows the person that she's running from her entire life is now confined her. This book is like her and this guy running and trying to figure out the mystery to this podcast. They're trying to solve the podcast because I listened to the whole podcast and it doesn't tell them the answer to the true crime. Like it's ambiguous. Like it's like doesn't answer it. The whole book is like them chasing this truth, and I just found it just so unbelievable. Like the things that they did, like they got themselves into, and then how like trusting and like just how following along this guy was, like this her best friend's husband was, just going along for this ride was just really crazy, and how he didn't know anything going on because this true crime connected to her past life, and it just all mixed, and it was just like wow. And there was just a fucking lot thrown at you. I didn't super enjoy it. The whole time I was reading this book, I was like, what the fuck is happening right now? This makes no sense. Literally zero sense. Bizarre. I don't know how else to explain it. I feel like I read it like a million years ago. Do you guys ever feel that way? Like the book that you read the first time, like the first book you read of the month, and then you have to do this wrap up, and you're like, I have no fucking idea what to say about this book. And now I've been talking for like 8 minutes. So let's move on. I don't recommend this book. I don't recommend it at all. And Reese, I really hope you don't make it into a movie or a TV show. If you do, I will watch it, but I don't want you to. The second book I read was The Scholar by Dervla McTiernan. So I read this book for the Girly Book Club, and I didn't mind this book. It's kind of like another thriller mystery book. So it centers around this guy who is a cop, and there's a murder in his town, and it's of this supposedly this wealthy girl, and then it turns out not to be her, and there's this whole like mystery on like what's going on, what's like the motivations for killing this girl, and then what were the motivations for these two girls to be looking exactly alike, for people to mistake this crime scene and the murder victim. So it's really interesting and fun. The thing that me and my book club kept harping about though was, I thought it was a really great book. I thought the story was great, the plot was great, it was really interesting, but for some reason, the author throws in random characters. Like some chapters, you learn about this other character, but they have no connection to the plot. Like they literally have none. There's this whole other crime being investigated that's totally separate from this murder that is talked about in this book, but never gets connected. Never. It's just its like own storyline happening and then never talked about again. Like it's just like that, and then other random characters that pop up have like their own chapter, but then they never appear again, and their story just doesn't come back. It's very random. So that was like my only thing. Like this book honestly felt like could have been a short story if you just took out these random fucking chapters. But I did enjoy it. I thought it was good, and I would recommend it if you really like thrillers and you don't mind just paging through a couple pages that have like no relevance to the story. Okay, so the third book I read was Frankly in Love, and this was for the group read for the Visco Readathon. I'm glad I read this because I usually would never have picked this up. Like I've seen it around booktube and bookstagram and things like that, but it's a YA book, so I probably would have never picked it up. And I thought it was really good. I think I would have given it like 3.5 stars, 4 stars. I just don't super enjoy the cheesiness of teen romance, and that's just not on the book or the people who really enjoy it or the author. I just like, it's just not my favorite. But I think a lot of like this serious things that came up and issues that had to be dealt with in this book were really not only like eye-opening, but really important, I think, to talk about, especially in a younger YA novel. Like, I think kids deserve to see themselves represented in stories, and this was a really great example of that happening, and I think that was great. Our main character is Frankly, and he is a Korean American, and he's stuck between living with his parents' very traditional views and then also growing up in Southern California. And with those very traditional Korean views, he is expected to date Korean. And he ends up falling in love with a white girl in his class. And so in order to date her, he comes up with a scheme, and the whole book is him trying to keep this up, and then the ultimate, you know, how do I keep doing this without hurting all the people around me? And I think it was a really great story. And it was a great story, just a show of teenage love. I thought that was also really great because it wasn't, I feel like a lot of the books that you read with teen romance kind of seem unrealistic, and I thought this book was really realistic. I thought it ended in a very realistic ending, and I really enjoyed that part. So if you guys really like YA, really like romance, I recommend Frankly in Love by David Yoon. Okay, so the next book I read was Patsy by Nicole Dennis Benn, and I have a whole book review on this, so I can link this below. I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was amazing, like 5 stars. I loved it. I think that she's an amazing author. Patsy is a book about Patsy, the main character, who lives in Jamaica with her daughter, but she yearns to go to America to be reconnected with her childhood love and friend Cecily. And Cecily has been sending her letters and telling her how great America is and how she wants her to come. And eventually Patsy is able to leave. She gets her visa and she goes to America and leaves her daughter behind. And the whole book is showing you the repercussions of that decision and what comes from that. And it goes and shows you Patsy's views and her thoughts and feelings in America, and then it also shows her daughter True's views and points and feelings back in Jamaica. And I thought it was a really great, emotional, amazing book. So if you guys haven't checked it out, I would definitely recommend Patsy. Okay, and then the next book I also read for the Visco Girl Readathon because I needed to read a graphic novel and a book outside my comfort zone. The book I read was Relish, My Life in the Kitchen by Lucy Kensley, and it's essentially a memoir of her life growing up with her mom, who's a chef, and then her dad, who is just super into food. He's like a mega foodie, appreciates fine tasting food, And I have a whole book review on this as well, so I will link that down below. I read another Reese Witherspoon book club pick this month, and that was The Secrets We Kept by Laura Prescott. This was one of her book club picks for 2019 for like November or October or something, very long ago, and I was on hold at the library for like 2 months, so I thought this book was going to be really, really good. I didn't enjoy it. So this book is a historical fiction book setting in the Cold War era and shows a group of women who are typists for one of the branches of the CIA. And some of the women are not only typists, but they have a nighttime job where they're spies and like couriers of information, which I love that idea and that plot point, and I want to see that. I just don't think it was really greatly executed. I just didn't think it was that awesome. The book follows a couple of mainly follows 2 characters, and they are the 2 females who are the ones who type by day and then go do like spy-ish work at night. One, I don't really think the spy work that they do is like worthy of noting down. Like if I wanted to write a book and I wanted to write a book about female spies, I want to see some like action and like some crazy stuff and them taking charge. And it was just of these 2 females having men order them around and then just telling them to like drop something off at a bench and then walk away. Like, you know how you like see those movies where they like just set down a book that has a hidden formula for something in the middle, and then they just drop it at the bench, and when the clock strikes 2, they walk away. And that's kind of like what they did this entire time. And it was just kind of like, well, they're just following orders from this guy, and it was just, I don't know. And they weren't well respected really, and I get that's probably what a lot of it was like for females, but I wanted, I don't know, something else, something more. We also get to see some perspective in Russia from 2 characters, a man and a woman. The man who is writing the famous book, Dr. Vizago. I haven't heard of it, and apparently it is a real book and it was very influential. So, shame on me for not knowing that. But their whole storyline was also kind of disappointing too. This woman doesn't take charge. She's constantly tethered to this author of this book. She has 2 kids that she just doesn't really think about, I think, personally, because they're tethered to this author and they're not married. She's his mistress, and when the Russian government is like after him, she gets to go to like a work camp, like pretty much a concentration camp for like 2 years, and then comes back and just stays with him regardless of the risk. She keeps telling him like, I don't want to go back, you have to stop this. And he's like, it's my work. Leave him. Leave his ass. I'm sorry. Like, leave. You starved and worked and dug and threw stones for like 2 years. He's not worth it. There was an interesting element to this book that I was not expecting, and I don't know if I want to give it away, but I was very happily surprised by it. So there was one thing, but then I felt like it was kind of ruined throughout the book, so I don't know. If you want to give it a try, I think you should, but don't waste your time. I don't know, that's how I feel, and I'm sure there's people who love this book, but I just thought that for a cool historical novel, focusing on these women being badass spies sure talked more about like just boring girl stuff, which I'm totally into girl stuff. Like I love talking about boys and dresses and stuff, but like I don't want to hear about them talking about that in this cool kick-ass spy novel. So that was just kind of a disappointment. Also, again, Reese, please don't make this into a movie or a show, but I know you will, probably, because you're taking over the world, and I'd still watch it. So I also finally read Heartland, a memoir of working hard and being broke in the richest country on earth by Sarah Smarsh. So I got this book in a Goodreads giveaway, and like this past summer. So it's been on my shelf for a while, and I finally read it. One of the things that I was really looking forward to this book is, so she talks about, it's a memoir of her, obviously, a memoir of working hard, growing up in Kansas. So I'm originally from South Dakota, and I thought that I would be able to relate to a lot of her things. And I think I could, to a point. Kind of enjoyed this book, and I kind of didn't. So she really just talks about growing up on the prairie, growing up in the Midwest, and growing up in this place where no one really appreciates the work that you do. She grows up on this farm, and she grows up with a mother who was a teenage mom and didn't want to be, but like her mom's mom, her grandma, was also a teenage mom, and it's just like this line of progression. And she addresses her unborn daughter in the book because it's just a cycle that she thought was going to continue, which I kind of like that element. A lot of the reviews said that it didn't really make sense, and I kind of thought it did, because there's a lot of times, and I don't know, like, I don't want to give like the whole perception of the Midwest, and there's probably a lot of people that felt differently, but I do feel like growing up in those small rural communities, there's like this curse kind of overhanging over you, and you're like, I know there's so many people in my family that have done this, so I'm just waiting for it to happen to me. It's something that you kind of are always thinking about. So like when I was in high school, I was like, I just want to get through high school without becoming a mom, and that's happened. And you know, it's just this thing that I could kind of see how you would want to be like, I did this for you because I didn't want you, and I wanted a better life for you. And I think that makes sense, is this whole like, I want to have this child. I don't know what it's going to be today or tomorrow, or if this never happens, but if it does, I want to make sure that I provide the best possible life. And I think we all feel that way in the end. Like, I think that's why we all do what we do. Like, we want to make this life better for ourselves, but in the end, for our unborn child as well, which is a whole fucking rant, but whatever. Anyways, so she's talking to her unborn daughter in this book and talking about the struggles and trials and errors of growing up poor and hungry and just unappreciated. And I think a lot of it makes sense. And I didn't grow up on a farm, and I didn't grow up in a rural community. I grew up in one of like the largest cities of South Dakota, so it was very like, I felt very kind of removed from this. But what I felt really connected with me was I could finally, from her story, finally take a peek into like my grandmother's kitchen in the 70s, or like see what it was like for my dad and my mom to grow up. It was very interesting in that aspect, because a lot of me, when I was reading this book, I was like, I wanted to just give this to all of my aunts, because there's a lot of talk about how like the people who suffer the most in these communities are the women, and I totally agree. These women are expected to not succeed or to work, but then they're also expected to care for their child when they become a single mother and they have no education and they have to figure out a means of survival, essentially. And I think that's just a really beautiful, complicated story, and I loved it. I also appreciated how in this book she recognized that, yes, that she was poor and she struggled, but they also did have the privilege of having white skin and benefited from the privileges that come from that. She suffered and her family suffered, but the communities of color around her suffered even more and suffered with different problems than she did, and she never had to experience those. And I liked how she kind of made sure to call that out as well. The thing that I just didn't super enjoy about this book is like, it wasn't fast moving. It was really hard. Like, it was hard to pick up. Like, it took me a while to read this compared to a lot of the other books I've read this month, and I never like looked forward to picking it up again. And when I was reading it, I kind of was just I would have like a page goal in mind when I was reading it, and the whole time I would just be like looking at the page number to see if I had made it. There were some interesting things and interesting stories, but mainly it kind of just made me sad and bored at the same time. I don't know if that makes sense. I think it was interesting and thought-provoking at some points, but a lot of it was kind of like repeating herself, very repetitive. I felt like I heard some of the same phrases over and over again, and maybe that was why it was very hard to get really into it, because I didn't think I was getting a lot of new ideas and perspectives. I was getting like the same one over and over, just said differently. But I don't know, I enjoyed it. If you grew up in the Midwest, I think it's interesting to see how your thoughts differ from this, or how they align with this. So I also recommend if you're not from the Midwest, just to check it out. I think it's interesting to see how different areas of the country live too. So I don't know, I think it's interesting. I would check it out from the library, don't buy it. Maybe get it from a giveaway, eventually read it, you know? I don't know. I wouldn't go out of your way to read it. This is the last book I read, was Ali Wong's Dear Girls. And I really loved this book. I really liked it. It's this whole, I would call it maybe like a memoir, but it's a letter to her daughters, because, which I thought was really sweet. And the whole motivation for writing this book was, I think, one, because I think she was paid to, but two, because the whole premise of the idea came because her dad wrote her a letter before he passed away, and she super loved that letter and really appreciated it, but she wanted more in the letter. Like, she wanted more information about her father. There was a lot of questions that she had unanswered, like what was it like growing up, or how did you feel during this time? What was it like coming here, and what was it like just doing, like, just all these questions that she had that she couldn't really get answered, and she really would have loved if he would have answered it in this letter. And so she wanted to write a letter to her daughters, really just explaining herself and who she is, and it was really great. It was emotional, and it was moving, and it was hilarious all at the same time, and it was really, really great and really heartwarming. Her humor comes off really well in this book, and I would say this is probably one of my favorite, like, celebrity memoirs I've read. So I definitely recommend if you haven't read Dear Girls, but if you haven't, check it out. That was a lot. That was a lot of books, a lot of talking. Those were all the books I've read in January. I do not think I will read 8 books in February. I think there's no way. So I hope you enjoyed this really, like, long, lots of books thrown at you wrap up, because it's not happening again. I'm looking forward to February. I'm hoping to read some really great books, and I'm taking part in the Blacklit Challenge, so if you haven't seen my video on that, definitely check that out. I'll link it below. Let me know what you guys have read this month, or what your favorite book of the month of January was. I'd love to hear it. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys next time.